My mother sold me to a monster, so I married a dying street beggar just to ruin her plans. But when her guards came to drag me back, my filthy new husband didn't cower. He stood up, snapped their bones like fragile twigs, and unleashed the terrifying aura of a supreme alpha. He wiped the dirt from his sharp jaw and looked at my terrified mother. "I don't just own this dirty street," he whispered. "I own the entire North. Welcome to Luna's Secret Library. On this channel, you can enjoy all sorts of romantic love stories. If you like my stories, please subscribe to my channel for more wonderful tales." My mother sold me to a monster today. She signed the mating contract with a greedy smile on her face. Lord Marcus was known as the most brutal alpha in the Northern Territories. He collected young, beautiful mates and broke them for sport. My mother did not care about my survival. She only cared about the gold coins he placed on our dining table. I stared at the heavy iron ring she forced onto my finger. It was a symbol of my impending doom. Tomorrow night, Marcus would claim me under the full moon. I refused to let that happen. I packed nothing but a silver dagger and a heavy wool cloak. I slipped out of my bedroom window into the freezing midnight snow. The winter air bit into my skin like sharp teeth. I knew my mother was sleeping peacefully in her warm bed. She was probably dreaming of the wealth my body had bought her. I hated her with every fiber of my being. I ran toward the poorest district of our settlement. The cobblestone streets were slick with ice and dark secrets. The snow was falling heavily now, quickly erasing my footprints. My plan was desperate but extremely simple. If I married a commoner before the moon rose, the alpha contract would be completely void. I needed to find the lowest, most pathetic man in the entire village. I turned into a narrow alleyway that smelled of rotten stale ale. A dark shape huddled in the corner against the frozen stone wall. It was a beggar wrapped in filthy, torn rags. He was shivering violently in the sub-zero temperature. I approached him cautiously with my heart hammering in my chest. "Do you want to live?" I whispered into the darkness. The man did not move at all. I knelt beside him right in the dirty snow. I could see dark, dried blood crusting his ragged collar. "I have gold," I said, pulling a shiny coin from my pocket. "Marry me right now, and I will give you enough money to survive this brutal winter." The beggar slowly lifted his heavy head. Thick, matted dark hair obscured his face. But beneath the dirt, a pair of piercing, ice-blue eyes locked onto mine. For a brief second, I thought I saw a flash of golden light in his pupils. It must have been a trick of the pale moonlight. A broken man like this could never possess the powerful golden gaze of an alpha. "Marriage is a permanent blood bond," his voice was hoarse, rough like grinding stones. "I know," I answered him without a single second of hesitation. "My mother is forcing me to mate with Lord Marcus tomorrow." The beggar flinched slightly at the mention of that cruel name. "I would rather tie my soul to a dying beggar than be his slave." The man stared at me with an intense focus that made me shiver. "You are throwing away your whole life to spite your mother," he stated bluntly. "I am saving my life," I corrected him firmly. I pulled out my sharp silver dagger. The ancient law requires a blood oath to finalize a sudden union. I sliced the palm of my hand without blinking an eye. Warm red blood welled up to the surface immediately. I held my bleeding hand out to the strange man. "Will you do it?" I demanded. The beggar looked at my hand, then slowly up at my face. He let out a low, strange sound that almost sounded like a dangerous growl. He reached out from beneath his filthy wool cloak. His hand was surprisingly large and very warm. He took the dagger gently from my tight grip. He drew the sharp blade across his own broad palm. Our blood mixed instantly as he clasped my hand tightly. A sudden, shocking jolt of electricity rushed straight up my arm. The sheer power of the bond hit me harder than a physical blow. It felt absolutely nothing like the weak union of a human beggar. It felt ancient, wild, and impossibly strong. The bond is sealed, I gasped, pulling my shaking hand back. You are now my husband. Before he could even reply, I heard the furious shouts of approaching guards. My mother had somehow discovered my escape. Bright torches lit up the dark entrance of the narrow alleyway. 5 of Marcus's elite enforcers marched toward us with their heavy swords drawn. My mother walked confidently right behind them. Her face was twisted into an ugly mask of pure rage. Amelia, she shrieked loudly, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. You foolish, ungrateful little girl. I stood up proudly and faced her squarely. You are far too late, Mother, I declared loudly for everyone to hear. I am already married. My mother stopped dead in her tracks in the middle of the snow. She looked down at the bleeding cut on my right hand. Then she looked in disgust at the filthy beggar sitting in the snow. She threw her head back and burst into cruel, mocking laughter. You married a homeless rat to escape a powerful lord, she sneered. Marcus will kill him in 10 seconds and take you to his bed anyway. The armed enforcers drew their swords and stepped aggressively toward the beggar. Kill the trash and drag the girl back by her hair, the lead guard ordered. I immediately jumped in front of the beggar to shield his body. If you touch my legally bound mate, the ruling council will execute you. I warned them. The guards laughed out loud at my empty threat. One of them reached out with a heavy leather glove to grab my hair. Suddenly, a massive, powerful hand shot past me and caught the guard's thick wrist. The horrific sound of snapping bone echoed loudly in the quiet, narrow alley. The guard screamed in pure agony and dropped heavily to his knees. The beggar slowly rose to his feet right behind me. He was no longer hunched over like a defeated man. He stood well over 6 feet tall, towering above the shocked enforcers. The filthy rags suddenly seemed far too small for his heavily muscled, powerful frame. An overwhelming, suffocating aura exploded violently from his body. It was the pure, crushing pressure of a dominant, top-tier alpha. My mother gasped sharply and stumbled backward in the deep snow. The remaining guards froze entirely in sheer, undeniable terror. The beggar stepped effortlessly in front of me, shielding me completely from their view. He wiped the dark dirt from his face, revealing a sharp, fiercely aristocratic jawline. His eyes were now glowing with a terrifying, undeniable golden fire. She is my mate now, his voice rumbled like distant thunder, shaking the very ground beneath our feet. And anyone who dares to touch her will answer directly to the King of the North. The guard on the ground was screaming in pure, unadulterated agony. The horrific sound echoed endlessly through the freezing stone alleyway. My mother stared in absolute shock at the giant man standing proudly in front of me. She was completely speechless for the first time in her miserable life. The golden fire burning in his eyes marked him as an alpha of the highest possible bloodline. His suffocating aura pressed down heavily on all of us. It made it incredibly difficult to draw a full breath of the icy air. You are just a filthy, worthless street rat, she finally stuttered in sheer panic. Her voice was shaking violently as she pointed a trembling finger at him. Lord Marcus will slaughter you like a pig and feed you to his hunting hounds. The man let out a dark, deep, rumbling laugh that vibrated straight through the cobblestones. Marcus, he sneered with a level of absolute disgust I had never heard before. Marcus is a weak, pathetic excuse for an alpha. Marcus pays me rent just to live on my dirt. My mother froze completely, her eyes widening to the size of large coins. I stepped cautiously out from behind his incredibly massive shoulder. Who are you? I whispered softly, looking up at his sharp, aristocratic profile. He turned his glowing golden eyes toward me, and his expression instantly softened. My name is Sterling, he declared smoothly, his voice washing over me like warm honey. I am the High Alpha of the Northern Highlands. The remaining 4 guards gasped loudly in collective, undeniable horror. Sterling was not just a name, he was a living, breathing legend. He was rumored to personally own more than half of the entire continent. People always whispered that his personal wealth could buy the king's crown 10 times over. Every single business, trade route, and major bank operated under his strict protection. Why in the world was the most powerful man alive disguised as a freezing beggar in the lowest slums? My mother's face turned incredibly pale, resembling dirty winter snow. Her greedy, calculating eyes darted rapidly to our tightly locked, blood-bound hands. Suddenly, her terrifying, ugly anger melted into a sickening, deeply fake smile. "Lord Sterling," she practically purred loudly, taking a hesitant step forward. "This is simply a wonderful, massive misunderstanding. My daughter Amelia is a beautiful, highly educated, and completely obedient girl. I was merely trying to protect her from the dangers of this terrible, dark alley." I felt incredibly nauseous listening to her blatant, shameless lies. Just hours ago, she had eagerly signed my life away to a known, brutal monster. Sterling's golden eyes narrowed dangerously, flashing with raw, untamed danger. "Do not speak directly to me, woman," his commanding voice cracked like a heavy leather whip. "You were perfectly willing to sell my blood-bonded mate to a known abuser." My mother flinched violently as if he had physically struck her across the face. "She is legally and spiritually bound to me now," Sterling declared loudly to the entire alley. "Every single one of her supposed debts to you is entirely erased from this moment forward. Her future now belongs solely to the Highland territory and to me." He turned his burning, intense gaze slowly back to the trembling, terrified guards. "Tell the pathetic Lord Marcus that his land lease is officially and permanently terminated. He has exactly 3 days to pack his belongings and vacate my southern borders. If he is not gone by sunset on the 3rd day, I will personally burn his entire estate to the ground." The heavily armed enforcers frantically nodded their heads in total submission. They hastily grabbed their injured comrade and dragged him aggressively through the thick snow. They ran away like frightened little rabbits, desperate to escape Sterling's crushing aura. My mother stood completely alone in the biting, freezing winter wind. Her grand, greedy plans of immense wealth and political power were entirely, irreversibly ruined. She reached out a desperate, shaking hand toward me. "Amelia, please," she begged loudly, fake tears streaming rapidly down her heavily powdered face. "You simply cannot leave your own loving mother here in the terrible cold. I raised you, I fed you, I protected you all these years." I looked coldly at the selfish woman who had tried to sell my body for gold coins. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, hard, deeply satisfying sense of complete relief. "You made your final choice yesterday, Mother," I told her firmly without a single ounce of pity. "Enjoy the empty house, because Marcus will surely come asking for his money back." Sterling wrapped a massive, incredibly warm arm tightly around my small waist. His unexpected touch sent a million electric sparks dancing violently across my cold skin. Despite his dirty, ruined clothes, he smelled wonderfully like fresh pine needles and raw, masculine power. "We are leaving immediately," he announced to the completely empty, dark street. A massive, pitch-black carriage suddenly appeared quietly at the far end of the narrow alley. It was pulled flawlessly by 4 enormous, pure black, heavily muscled horses. The polished wooden carriage doors proudly bore the shining silver crest of the Highland Alpha. Where had this magnificent, royal carriage come from so quickly? Had he been secretly waiting for his men to finally locate him? He effortlessly lifted me entirely off the frozen, icy ground. I was safely and warmly tucked against his broad, incredibly muscular chest. He carried me securely toward the luxurious carriage without ever looking back at my mother. My mother's desperate, angry wails quickly faded into the howling, endless winter wind. The massive carriage interior was entirely lined with expensive, soft, dark red velvet. It was incredibly warm inside, heated by a small, magically glowing stone in the center. Sterling sat directly opposite me, filling up most of the space with his large frame. He slowly pulled off his filthy, ruined outer wool cloak and tossed it onto the floor. Underneath, he wore a fine, dark linen shirt that stretched tightly across his broad chest. "Why did you do it?" I asked quietly, finally breaking the heavy, tense silence between us. Why did the legendary High Alpha pretend to be a dying, pathetic beggar in the freezing slums? Sterling leaned back gracefully into the soft plush velvet cushions. His piercing, intelligent eyes studied my face with an intense, burning curiosity. "I was actively hunting for a dangerous traitor within my own upper ranks," he admitted softly. "I desperately needed to move through the lower city slums completely unnoticed by the local spies. I was poisoned, my power temporarily bound, waiting for my loyal guards to track my location. But then a brave, incredibly foolish young girl suddenly offered me a shiny gold coin. She eagerly offered to tie her pure soul to a dying, dirty man just to fiercely defy a local tyrant." He reached out slowly and gently traced the rapidly healing cut on my right palm. The blood bond between us hummed happily under his gentle, warm touch. "You deeply surprised me tonight, Amelia. And ancient alphas like me are very, very rarely surprised." I stared at his ruggedly handsome face, still slightly smeared with street dirt. "So, our marriage is just a convenient accident?" I whispered, feeling a strange, sudden ache in my chest. "A temporary arrangement until you return to your grand palace and your real life." Sterling's eyes flashed with a sudden, intense golden light that completely illuminated the dark carriage. He leaned forward, closing the small physical distance between us in a single second. He gently but firmly gripped my chin, forcing me to look directly into his burning eyes. "There is absolutely nothing temporary about a blood bond, Amelia." His voice was low and possessive. "You literally sliced your hand open and mixed your life essence with mine. You claimed me in the lowest, darkest moment of my entire existence. The ancient magic of the Alpha world does not recognize mistakes or convenient accidents. You are my High Luna now, the absolute mistress of the entire Northern Highlands. My wealth, my immense lands, and my loyal armies now belong entirely to you." I felt my breath catch sharply in my throat at his incredibly intense words. I had run away tonight simply hoping to survive the cruel winter as a peasant. Now, I was suddenly the most powerful woman on the entire continent. "But we don't even know each other," I argued weakly, my heart hammering against my ribs. "We have the rest of our extremely long lives to learn every detail," he replied smoothly. He gently brushed a stray snowflake from my tangled, freezing hair. "Starting with the fact that you will never, ever be sold or used again. Anyone who even attempts to disrespect you will answer directly to my blade." The heavy carriage suddenly jolted forward, picking up incredible speed on the icy roads. We were leaving my old, miserable life far behind in the freezing darkness. I leaned back against the soft red velvet, feeling safer than I had in my entire life. My cruel mother had tried to force me into hell, but she had accidentally handed me the keys to heaven. I looked across the small space at my new, terrifyingly powerful husband. Sterling was staring out the dark window, his sharp jawline tight with unspoken thoughts. Our chaotic journey was only just beginning, and I was entirely ready for whatever came next. The massive black carriage finally stopped at a hidden stone fortress deep in the snowy mountains. The heavy wooden doors opened to reveal a massive courtyard filled with heavily armed soldiers. Sterling stepped out first, easily carrying me in his strong, protective arms. Dozens of elite warriors immediately dropped to their knees in the freezing, deep snow. They bowed deeply in absolute reverence to their returning, immensely powerful High Alpha. But I could clearly see the confusion and deep disgust in their hard eyes when they looked at me. I was still wearing a dirty, torn wool cloak over a cheap, ruined peasant dress. My hair was wildly tangled from the intense, freezing winter wind we had just escaped. I certainly did not look like the powerful, elegant mate of a billionaire ruler. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a severely scarred face marched aggressively toward us. He was Commander Hayes, the ruthless second-in-command of the entire Northern Highlands. "My Alpha, we have successfully secured the entire outer perimeter," Hayes announced loudly. His cold, calculating eyes darted to me with pure, undisguised hatred and intense malice. "But why did you bring this filthy street trash into our sacred, ancient stronghold? She smells like the lowest, most diseased slums of the outer city." Before Sterling could punish the man for his extreme, unforgivable disrespect, disaster struck. Sterling suddenly let out a terrible, deeply choked cough that shook his entire massive frame. Thick, incredibly dark blood spilled rapidly from his pale lips onto the pure white snow. The terrible, hidden poison he had mentioned in the carriage was suddenly fighting back. It was violently rejecting the sudden, massive power surge from our new blood bond. His heavily muscled body trembled violently, and he dropped heavily to one knee in the snow. Complete, absolute chaos erupted instantly in the previously quiet, disciplined stone courtyard. Soldiers shouted loudly in absolute panic, drawing their heavy swords without any clear enemy to fight. Commander Hayes immediately rushed forward and shoved me hard on my fragile shoulder. "Get away from him, you dirty, murderous witch!" Hayes roared directly into my face. "You must have secretly poisoned our Alpha in the slums to steal his endless wealth." Two heavily armored guards grabbed my arms tightly with brutal, deeply bruising force. They were actively preparing to drag me straight down into the freezing, dark dungeons below. I felt a sudden, sharp spike of genuine fear, but I completely refused to act like a weak victim. My cruel mother had taught me exactly how to survive among vicious, powerful, and greedy people. Panic was always an absolute death sentence in the dangerous world of high nobility. I took a deep breath and focused entirely on the burning, magical blood bond in my right hand. I closed my eyes and forcefully pushed my own raw energy through the invisible, ancient connection. Sterling let out a loud, desperate gasp as my pure energy hit his struggling, poisoned heart. I opened my eyes, and they were glowing with a bright, terrifying, brilliant silver light. It was the undeniable, ancient, and highly revered mark of a fully awakened High Lunar. "Take your filthy hands off me immediately," I commanded in a voice that did not sound like my own. The sheer, crushing power of my voice sent a physical shockwave through the freezing mountain air. The two heavy guards gasped in sudden pain and instantly dropped my bruised, aching arms. They fell heavily to their knees, physically forced down by the crushing weight of my new aura. Even Commander Hayes stumbled backward, his scarred face turning pale with sudden, genuine fear. I knelt quickly in the freezing snow next to Sterling and gently lifted his heavy, dark head. His glowing golden eyes were cloudy, fighting a desperate, losing battle against the dark poison. I looked incredibly closely at the dark, thick blood staining his pale, beautiful lips. It had a strange, slightly sickeningly sweet smell, exactly like crushed, rotting black lotus flowers. My extensive, deeply forced education in dirty noble politics suddenly paid off in a massive way. "This is not a common, cheap street poison," I declared loudly, my voice echoing off the high stone walls. "This is black lotus extract, an incredibly rare, deadly toxin that only grows in the deep southern swamps." I stood up slowly and fixed my glowing, furious silver eyes directly on Commander Hayes. A random beggar in the freezing northern slums could never afford or acquire such an expensive, highly restricted weapon. Only someone with high-level military clearance and incredibly deep pockets could safely smuggle it here. The entire massive courtyard went completely, terrifyingly silent as my dangerous words sank in. I pointed a steady, directly accusing finger at Commander Hayes's heavy, expensive leather boots. And it is absolutely fascinating that your boots are completely covered in pale yellow swamp mud. There is no yellow mud anywhere in these freezing, endlessly snowy northern mountains. You have recently traveled in secret to the southern swamps, Commander. Hayes's eyes widened in sheer, undeniable panic as the other elite soldiers slowly turned to look at him. He had loudly claimed to be hunting the dangerous traitor, but my sharp mind had just exposed him completely. The dirty street rat is lying to save herself. Hayes screamed desperately, drawing his sharp silver sword. Kill the evil witch before she completely corrupts the High Alpha's noble mind. He lunged forward with brutal, terrifying speed, aiming the sharp, deadly blade directly at my heart. I did not scream for help, and I certainly did not run away like a helpless, weak little girl. I simply stood my ground confidently, entirely trusting the ancient, powerful bond singing in my warm veins. Before Hayes could even cross half the short distance, a massive hand violently grabbed his thick throat. Sterling was suddenly standing perfectly straight, moving much faster than humanly possible. The dangerous poison was still in his system, but my lunar energy had given him a massive, instant burst of pure power. Sterling lifted the heavy, fully armored commander entirely off the ground by his neck alone. "You dared to raise a dirty blade against your High Lunar," Sterling whispered, his deep voice sounding like pure, cutting ice. He threw Hayes violently against the hard stone wall with a loud, sickening crunch of breaking, shattered bones. The treacherous commander fell heavily to the snowy ground, completely unconscious and totally broken. Sterling turned slowly to face the rest of his shocked, trembling, absolutely silent elite army. He casually wiped the very last drop of dark blood from his sharp, highly aristocratic jawline. "Amelia is not some common, worthless street beggar," Sterling announced loudly, his golden eyes blazing with fierce, protective pride. "She is a brilliant, highly educated woman who just saved my life and exposed a deadly, hidden traitor in our own ranks. She is your true High Lunar, and from this exact moment forward, her word is absolute law." Every single soldier in the massive courtyard immediately dropped their heavy, sharp weapons into the deep snow. They violently slammed their right fists over their hearts in a perfect, entirely synchronized military salute. "Long live the High Lunar," they chanted loudly, their booming voices literally shaking the heavy snow from the high castle roofs. I looked at the massive sea of powerful warriors bowing completely and unconditionally to my absolute will. Just yesterday morning, I was a helpless, abused prisoner trapped in my greedy mother's cruel house. Today, I had used my own sharp intelligence to entirely conquer the most dangerous army in the entire world. Sterling reached out slowly and gently pulled my cold, shaking hand into his massive, incredibly warm grasp. "You are far more dangerous than I ever imagined, my brave little bird," he murmured softly directly into my ear. His glowing golden eyes promised me a brilliant future filled with endless power and deep, undeniable passion. The heavy oak doors of the central war room slammed shut against the freezing wind. The blazing fire in the massive stone hearth instantly warmed my freezing skin. Sterling collapsed heavily into a massive leather chair carved with the Highland crest. His breathing was rough and heavy as his powerful body fought the remaining poison. My newly awakened lunar energy had saved his life, but he still needed critical rest. I stood quietly near the blazing fire, feeling entirely out of place in this military sanctuary. The walls were completely covered in giant, ancient maps of the entire Northern Territory. Suddenly, the heavy doors burst open, and a breathless scout rushed into the room. He was followed closely by a tall, gray-haired man wearing heavy silver armor. "My Alpha, we have intercepted an urgent raven from the southern border," the older man announced. Sterling slowly opened his golden eyes, fighting through the obvious physical pain. "Speak clearly, General Gideon," Sterling commanded in a low, dangerous rumble. "The message is written in a highly complex, newly developed Southern cipher. Our best military codebreakers estimate it will take at least 20 hours to translate. Gideon looked incredibly stressed, his hardened face tight with deep worry. We fear that the disgraced Lord Marcus is planning an immediate retaliation. I stepped forward without thinking, my heavy wool cloak trailing on the stone floor. Let me see the parchment, I demanded softly but with absolute, unquestionable authority. General Gideon frowned deeply and instinctively pulled the small paper away from me. With all due respect, my Luna, this is a highly classified military document. A sheltered noble girl from the outer city cannot possibly understand war codes. Sterling suddenly let out a low, terrifying growl that completely shook the stone room. You will immediately hand the message to your High Luna, Sterling ordered coldly. General Gideon swallowed hard and quickly handed me the rolled parchment. I unrolled the small paper and stared at the chaotic jumble of letters and numbers. My cruel mother had forced me to memorize every known cipher since I was a child. She wanted me to be her perfect, invisible spy in the high society drawing rooms. Her terrible abuse was suddenly becoming my absolute greatest weapon. I quickly scanned the random letters, looking for a specific, repeating pattern. This is not a new military cipher at all, I stated confidently, looking up at Gideon. This is the old King's Court displacement code, completely reversed and shifted by the current lunar cycle. Gideon stared at me in total, absolute disbelief. That specific code has been entirely dead for over 50 years, he argued quickly. My mother is a highly traditional, incredibly paranoid woman, I replied coldly. She forced me to translate entire history books using this exact method. I grabbed a piece of charcoal from the table and began writing rapidly on a blank map. The seemingly random letters instantly formed clear, deeply terrifying words under my hand. Marcus is not retreating to the southern swamps like he was ordered. He has secretly purchased 300 heavily armed mercenaries from the western coast. They are currently marching straight toward the narrow Iron Pass. He plans to trap our supply wagons there before sunrise tomorrow. General Gideon turned incredibly pale, realizing the massive scale of the impending disaster. Our main supply convoy is passing through the Iron Pass tonight, Gideon whispered in horror. If Marcus destroys those wagons, our entire winter food reserve will be gone. Our soldiers and their families will literally starve before the spring thaw. I looked at the detailed map on the table, my mind racing faster than ever before. I was no longer just fighting for my own survival, I was fighting for my new people. We cannot just send the main army to the Iron Pass now, I stated logically. It is a narrow canyon, and our massive numbers will be completely useless in there. Marcus is heavily relying on the element of total surprise to slaughter our guards. Sterling watched me from his leather chair, his golden eyes burning with intense pride. What exactly is your strategy, Amelia? Sterling asked, his deep voice filled with absolute trust. I placed my finger directly on a small, hidden ridge completely overlooking the Iron Pass. We do not stop the supply wagons, we let them proceed exactly as planned. But we secretly position 50 of our absolute best archers on the Viper Ridge. The Western mercenaries use heavy steel shields that are incredibly difficult to carry uphill. When they enter the canyon to attack the wagons, they will be entirely trapped in the bottleneck. Our archers will rain fire arrows down on them from the high ridge before they even draw their swords. General Gideon stared at the map, completely tracing my proposed attack route with his thick finger. A slow, deeply impressed smile spread across his scarred, battle-worn face. It is a completely flawless, devastatingly effective ambush, Gideon admitted loudly. It perfectly turns their own sneak attack into a massive, inescapable death trap. Gideon dropped to one knee, finally showing me true, unforced military respect. I deeply apologize for doubting your sharp mind, High Luna. I will personally lead the archers to the Viper Ridge immediately. Do it, I commanded firmly, feeling the ancient lunar power humming strongly in my blood. Gideon bowed quickly and rushed out of the war room to assemble his elite squad. The heavy oak doors closed, leaving me completely alone with the most dangerous man alive. I suddenly felt my legs shaking as the massive rush of adrenaline finally faded. I had just confidently ordered an entire military strike that would kill hundreds of men. Sterling slowly stood up from his chair, moving with absolute, terrifying grace despite his weakness. He walked quietly across the stone floor and stopped right in front of me. He reached out and gently cupped my face with his incredibly warm, massive hands. "You are a brilliant, completely terrifying creature, Amelia," he murmured softly. His thumb slowly wiped away a single, unfallen tear from the corner of my eye. "You just saved my entire territory from starvation with a piece of charcoal." "I did what I had to do to protect our people," I whispered, surprised by my own words. "Our people." The words felt incredibly right, settling deeply and permanently into my heart. Sterling leaned down, his warm breath sending wonderful shivers straight down my spine. "Your mother thought she was creating a perfect little pawn," he said, his lips brushing against my forehead. "But she accidentally forged an absolutely unstoppable, brilliant queen." His strong arms wrapped entirely around me, pulling me against his hard chest. I buried my face in his warm shirt, finally allowing myself to feel completely safe. The brutal war outside was just beginning, but I was entirely ready to win it. The freezing morning sun finally rose over the victorious, heavily guarded Highland fortress. General Gideon's perfect ambush at the Viper Ridge had been an absolute, crushing success. Marcus's expensive, heavily armed mercenaries were completely defeated and scattered into the frozen wilderness. I stood by the massive glass window of our bedroom, watching the safe arrival of our vital supply wagons. Sterling was sleeping deeply on the massive fur-lined bed behind me, finally healing from the dark poison. Suddenly, a terrified young guard knocked frantically on the heavy oak door. He carried a small, blood-stained wooden box that had been left at the outer fortress gate. My heart dropped violently into my stomach when I opened the cracked wooden lid. Inside the box was a cheap, tarnished silver locket completely covered in fresh, dark blood. I instantly recognized the old, dented locket because I had bought it with my own saved pennies years ago. It belonged to Beatrice, the frail, elderly maid who had practically raised me in my mother's cruel house. Beatrice was the only person in the entire world who had ever shown me true, unconditional maternal love. She used to secretly bring me stolen bread when my mother deliberately locked me in the dark cellar to starve. Under the bloody locket was a tightly rolled piece of parchment written in my mother's elegant, heartless handwriting. The message was incredibly short, violently cruel, and entirely directed at my deepest vulnerability. "We have your pathetic, crippled old dog, and we know your fake alpha is currently dying from swamp poison. Come completely alone to the ruined Ravencrest sanctuary before the midday sun reaches its highest point. If we see even a single Highland soldier, we will burn the old woman alive and send you her ashes." My hands shook violently, instantly crushing the heavy parchment into a tight, crumpled ball. I felt a massive, deeply terrifying wave of pure, unadulterated rage explode inside my chest. My cruel mother knew exactly how to hurt me, and she was willing to torture an innocent elder to do it. Sterling suddenly sat up in the massive bed, his glowing golden eyes instantly locking onto my panicked face. The ancient blood bond between us allowed him to feel my sudden, overwhelming terror and fury. He threw off the heavy winter furs, his massive, heavily muscled body radiating intense, dangerous heat. "What has that wicked woman done now?" Sterling growled, moving swiftly across the stone floor to my side. I silently handed him the crumpled letter and the deeply stained silver locket. A terrifying, absolute silence filled the room as Sterling read the vicious, demanding threat. His sharp jawline locked tightly, and the heavy stone walls actually began to tremble from his raw alpha fury. "I will personally assemble the entire Northern Army and slaughter every living soul at Ravencrest," he declared violently. "No, you absolutely cannot send the army," I argued desperately, grabbing his massive, warm arm. Marcus is a massive coward who will instantly execute Beatrice the exact second he sees your military banners. I have to follow their instructions perfectly and walk into that sanctuary completely alone. Sterling stared at me in total, absolute disbelief, his protective instincts violently rejecting my dangerous plan. I will never allow you to surrender yourself to that brutal, sadistic monster, he roared, grabbing my shoulders. You are my High Luna, and I would gladly burn this entire continent to ash before I let him touch you. I reached up and gently pressed my trembling hands against his tense, angry cheeks. I am not surrendering to them, Sterling, I whispered fiercely, my silver lunar eyes beginning to glow brightly. I am walking into their pathetic trap to distract them completely. Marcus is heavily expecting a weak, frightened, completely helpless little girl. He does not know that the blood bond has fundamentally changed my physical strength and my magical aura. I will hold their full attention, giving you exactly enough time to bypass their perimeter security. You can easily scale the sheer back cliff of the Ravencrest Mountain without drawing any military attention. Sterling's golden eyes widened slightly, deeply impressed by my cold, incredibly calculated tactical logic. He pulled me roughly against his broad chest, burying his face in my tangled, dark hair. If he harms a single hair on your beautiful head, I will tear his heart from his chest while he still breathes. I dressed quickly in a heavy, dark hunting leather outfit, leaving my elegant royal dresses completely behind. I strapped a sharp, deadly silver dagger securely to my thigh beneath my thick winter cloak. The journey to the ruined sanctuary was brutally cold, completely silent, and incredibly lonely. The ancient stone temple sat heavily on the very edge of a massive, deadly frozen cliff. I pushed open the rotting wooden doors and stepped bravely into the dark, freezing main hall. My cruel mother was standing proudly near the ruined altar, wrapped entirely in an expensive fur coat. Lord Marcus stood aggressively beside her, holding a heavy steel chain attached to the ceiling. At the very end of that terrible chain hung poor, elderly Beatrice, suspended dangerously over a large pile of dry wood. Beatrice's face was horribly bruised, but she wept openly when she saw me walk through the heavy doors. Run away, my sweet Amelia, the old woman cried out desperately with her broken voice. Marcus let out a cruel, triumphant laugh that echoed loudly across the dark, empty stone walls. The brave little street rat finally returns to her rightful, miserable place, Marcus sneered arrogantly. Your pathetic beggar husband must be lying dead in a pool of his own black vomit by now. My mother smiled wickedly, her greedy eyes already calculating the massive wealth she would soon reclaim. Kneel before your new master, Amelia, and beg him for his generous forgiveness, my mother commanded sharply. I did not kneel, I did not cry, and I certainly did not show them a single ounce of fear. I stood perfectly straight, my hands resting calmly at my sides, silently waiting for the shadows above them to move. The freezing, damp air inside the ruined sanctuary smelled heavily of ancient dust and pure malice. My mother stared at me with greedy, highly expectant eyes, waiting for me to break down completely. She truly believed she had finally completely cornered the rebellious daughter she had always despised. Lord Marcus stepped confidently forward, his expensive velvet cape dragging heavily across the dirty stone floor. You really thought a filthy street beggar could save you from me? Marcus laughed loudly and cruelly. I am a wealthy, powerful alpha, and you are nothing but a piece of property I purchased. I did not flinch or look away from his ugly, incredibly arrogant face. I simply stood perfectly straight, calmly listening for the slightest sound from the massive stone roof above. You are not a true, powerful alpha, Marcus, I stated slowly, my voice echoing clearly through the empty hall. You are a pathetic, deeply insecure little coward who has to buy women because no one would willingly choose you. Marcus stopped laughing immediately, his face violently twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. My mother gasped loudly in complete shock, highly offended by my sudden, aggressive disrespect. "How dare you speak to your new master that way?" my mother shrieked loudly from the altar. I completely ignored the wicked woman and kept my burning silver eyes locked entirely on Marcus. "You lost your lucrative southern lands because you are weak and completely incompetent," I continued ruthlessly. "You had to hire cheap, foreign mercenaries because your own loyal soldiers completely abandoned you. And now you are desperately threatening a frail, helpless old woman just to force a young girl to look at you." Every single word I spoke hit his fragile, pathetic ego like a heavy steel hammer. Marcus was shaking violently with pure, uncontrollable anger, his hands clenching tightly into heavy fists. "I will personally carve that sharp, wicked tongue right out of your pretty mouth," Marcus roared furiously. He quickly drew a long, curved hunting dagger from his jeweled belt and marched directly toward me. He completely forgot about the burning fire and the helpless old maid hanging from the heavy chain. He only wanted to destroy the confident, fearless woman standing proudly in front of him. He raised the sharp, deadly blade high into the freezing air, aiming directly for my unprotected face. I did not move a single muscle, my heart perfectly calm because I finally heard the glorious sound I was waiting for. A massive, deeply terrifying explosion of shattering glass suddenly echoed from the high sanctuary ceiling. The enormous, ancient stained glass window high above us exploded violently inward in a million glittering pieces. A massive, heavily muscled shadow dropped straight down from the freezing winter sky. Sterling landed heavily onto the solid stone floor between me and Marcus with an earth-shattering crash. The sheer, raw impact of his perfect landing cracked the heavy, ancient stone tiles for yards in every direction. He slowly rose to his full, towering height, entirely unhurt by the massive, impossible drop. A suffocating, deeply terrifying wave of pure alpha pressure violently exploded from his large body. The heavy, invisible weight of his ancient aura immediately forced my mother straight to her knees. Marcus froze completely mid-step, his eyes widening in sheer, absolute horror at the giant man before him. He instantly recognized the burning, furious golden eyes of the legendary High Alpha of the North. Sterling did not speak a single word, completely bypassing any formal military or noble protocols. He moved with blinding, impossible speed, instantly closing the small distance between him and Marcus. Sterling's massive left hand shot out and brutally grabbed Marcus's right wrist. With a sickening, incredibly loud snap, Sterling violently twisted the arm, completely shattering the bone. Marcus let out an agonizing, ear-piercing scream that violently shook the remaining glass from the windows. The sharp, deadly hunting dagger dropped uselessly onto the cracked stone floor. Before Marcus could even process the massive pain, Sterling grabbed his other arm and mercilessly crushed the elbow. Marcus collapsed heavily into the freezing dirt, violently sobbing and completely broken in mere seconds. Sterling placed his heavy, expensive leather boot firmly on Marcus's bleeding, defeated chest. "You dared to threaten my High Luna," Sterling growled softly, his deep voice sounding like a literal earthquake. "You dared to bring your filthy, pathetic presence anywhere near her sacred light." My mother was violently shaking on the floor, watching her grand, wealthy savior being destroyed like a fragile toy. She tried to crawl desperately backward toward the heavy wooden doors, weeping loudly in total panic. Sterling did not even look at her, he simply reached up with one massive, incredibly strong hand. He grabbed the heavy steel chain holding poor Beatrice and pulled it violently downward. The massive iron mechanism in the ceiling completely broke, and the chain dropped safely into his hand. He gently lowered the terrified, weeping old maid completely away from the dangerous, unlit fire pit. I rushed forward immediately and wrapped my own heavy winter cloak around Beatrice's freezing, fragile shoulders. "You are completely safe now, Beatrice," I whispered softly, kissing the old woman's bruised forehead. Sterling finally turned his burning, golden gaze toward my completely ruined, terrified mother. "Take your miserable, broken puppet and crawl out of my northern territory," Sterling commanded coldly. If I ever see your greedy face again, I will not be nearly this generous." My mother scrambled frantically to her feet, completely abandoning her expensive fur coat on the floor. She ran desperately out into the freezing winter storm, leaving her ruined plans entirely behind. Sterling kicked the crying, broken Marcus away and turned directly toward me. The violent, terrifying monster instantly vanished, perfectly replaced by a fiercely gentle, loving husband. He wrapped his massive, warm arms entirely around me, pulling me safely against his beating heart. "You are absolutely brilliant, my brave little queen," he whispered directly into my tangled hair. "And you are exactly on time, my fierce king," I replied quietly, feeling completely invincible in his arms. Our enemies were totally destroyed, and the entire northern kingdom finally belonged to us. We returned to the massive, heavily fortified stone fortress just as the pale winter sun began to set. Sterling personally carried the exhausted, safely sleeping Beatrice directly to the absolute finest guest chamber in the castle. He immediately ordered his top personal royal healers to attend to her every single medical need. For the first time in my entire, miserable life, I did not have to worry about the safety of the people I loved. The dark, terrifying shadow of my cruel mother's endless control was finally broken and shattered forever. Tonight was the official winter solstice, widely known as the most sacred night in the ancient northern calendar. It was also the exact night Sterling chose to officially present me to his entire massive kingdom. A team of highly respectful, incredibly skilled royal handmaidens arrived quietly at our private master chambers. They gently bathed me in a large, warm copper tub filled with beautifully crushed, fragrant winter roses. They brushed my heavily tangled dark hair until it finally shone like smooth, expensive spun silk. They did not look at me with the ugly pity or deep disgust I always saw from the servants in my old home. They looked at me with deep, genuine reverence and absolute, unquestionable respect. They carefully dressed me in the traditional, incredibly heavy ceremonial gown of the High Luna. The magnificent dress was made of pure midnight blue velvet, heavily embroidered with thick, real silver threads. The silver details perfectly matched the terrifying, brilliant light of my newly awakened magical aura. A heavy, incredibly warm pure white wolf fur mantle was placed gently over my fragile, shivering shoulders. When I finally looked into the tall, polished glass mirror, I completely gasped in absolute shock. I was no longer the frightened, badly abused little girl who had desperately run away into the freezing snow. I was a powerful, fiercely beautiful, and completely untouchable queen of the north. Sterling walked quietly into the elegant dressing room, wearing his formal, highly polished black battle armor. His bright golden eyes darkened immediately with intense, overwhelming passion when he finally saw me. He walked slowly up behind me and gently rested his massive, warm hands securely on my small waist. He reached into a small velvet box and pulled out the ancient, incredibly heavy jeweled lunar crown. It was masterfully forged from solid white silver and heavily embedded with deeply glowing, rare blue sapphires. He carefully placed the heavy royal crown on my head, his warm fingers gently brushing my pale cheek. "You were absolutely born to wear this heavy crown, my beautiful Amelia," he whispered softly into my ear. "Tonight, the entire world will finally know exactly who you are and who you belong to." He proudly offered me his strong, muscular arm, and we walked perfectly together toward the massive grand balcony. The heavy oak doors swung open, revealing the enormous, completely packed stone courtyard far below us. Tens of thousands of northern citizens and heavily armored elite soldiers stood proudly in the freezing winter night. They held thousands of brightly burning torches that completely illuminated the dark, endless snowy mountains. When Sterling and I stepped up to the stone balcony edge, a massive, deafening roar instantly erupted from the crowd. It was an incredibly powerful, earth-shaking sound of pure, unadulterated joy and fierce, unconditional loyalty. Sterling raised his massive right hand, and the enormous, chaotic crowd instantly fell completely, terrifyingly silent. My loyal, brave people of the true north, Sterling's deep, booming voice echoed magically for miles across the valley. For many long, dark years, our massive territory has lacked the vital, guiding light of a true High Lunar. 3 days ago, I was secretly poisoned, physically weak, and heavily disguised in the lowest southern slums. This incredibly brave woman willingly sacrificed her own freedom to save my life with an ancient blood bond. She has already exposed a deadly military traitor, saved our winter food supplies, and completely defeated our cowardly enemies. He turned slowly to me, his glowing golden eyes filled with an endless, beautiful ocean of deep adoration. I proudly present to you Amelia, the true, unquestionable High Lunar of the entire Northern Highlands. I stepped forward slightly, physically feeling the heavy, ancient magic of the land happily rise up to greet me. I did not need to shout, because my powerful silver aura naturally and perfectly amplified my calm voice. I vow to fiercely protect this beautiful, harsh land and every single precious soul who calls it home, I declared proudly. Anyone who stands loyally with us will never know deep hunger, cold fear, or cruel oppression ever again. The absolute sincerity in my voice resonated deeply through the powerful, invisible blood bond one now shared with the vast territory. The entire massive army instantly drew their heavy steel swords and raised them proudly toward the starry sky. The common citizens dropped to their knees in the thick snow, openly weeping tears of pure joy and profound relief. Long live the invincible High Alpha! Long live the brilliant High Lunar! They chanted endlessly into the freezing night. I looked down at the massive sea of devoted people, my broken heart swelling with incredible, healing warmth. I had started this chaotic week as a desperate, unwanted prisoner begging the universe for a quick death. Now, I possessed more unimaginable wealth, absolute power, and genuine love than my wicked mother could ever comprehend. Sterling pulled me close, gently pressing his warm, firm lips deeply against my cold forehead. They absolutely adore you already, he murmured happily, wrapping his large, heavy black cape tightly around us both. Because they finally have a protective mother who actually loves them back, I replied softly, leaning into his solid chest. The grand, joyous celebration officially began, with massive, warm bonfires lighting up the entire northern sky. Loud music and genuine laughter echoed happily through the mountains, completely replacing the dark shadows of recent war. But as we stood there enjoying our perfect, hard-won victory, a strange, frantic bird suddenly landed on the cold stone rail. It was a completely black raven, but its sharp eyes glowed with a sick, unnatural, terrifying green magical fire. Sterling's relaxed, genuinely happy smile instantly vanished, perfectly replaced by a cold, hardened warrior's deadly glare. The small, dark bird dropped a tiny, tightly rolled silver scroll directly at my expensive leather boots. The brutal, physical war against Lord Marcus was completely over, but it seemed a much darker, incredibly ancient enemy had just awakened. The green fire in the raven's eyes was the terrifying mark of the High Ruling Council. They were the supreme, absolute authority over every alpha on the entire continent. Sterling quickly picked up the small silver scroll from the cold stone floor. His golden eyes turned incredibly dark as he read the harsh royal mandate. The High Council completely rejected my sudden ascension to High Lunar. They violently refused to accept a girl with an unknown background ruling the massive north. They are sending a royal inquisitor to sever our ancient blood bond, Sterling announced coldly. The joyous celebration in the massive courtyard instantly turned into deadly, terrified silence. Before anyone could even react, heavy war horns echoed fiercely from the southern mountain pass. A massive fleet of golden-armored royal guards marched directly toward our iron gates. At their front rode High Inquisitor Victor, a ruthless man known for executing rebellious alphas. His eyes were completely black, entirely empty of any human emotion or mercy. Alpha Sterling, Victor's chilling voice carried easily over the high stone walls. Surrender the fake Luna immediately, or permanently forfeit your entire northern autonomy. Sterling did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. He forcefully drew his massive, glowing broadsword, ready to wage a hopeless war. He was fully prepared to fight the Supreme Crown just to protect my life. "We die here tonight before they touch my wife," Sterling commanded his loyal army. The northern soldiers instantly raised their weapons, entirely willing to bleed for me. But I could absolutely not let my new people die in a massive, pointless slaughter. I stepped quickly in front of Sterling, gently pushing his heavy steel sword downward. "I will handle this," I whispered, feeling my silver aura hum with absolute confidence. I leaned over the stone balcony and looked directly into Victor's dead, black eyes. My mother's cruel forced education had included the darkest, most hidden royal laws. I formally invoked the ancient trial of the Luna. I declared loudly to the Golden Army. Victor's massive warhorse stepped backward slightly, completely shocked by my bold words. That specific, deadly trial had not been successfully invoked in over 400 years. It required the challenged Luna to withstand the Inquisitor's raw, unfiltered soul pressure. If I survived, the High Council could never legally question my royal legitimacy again. If I failed, my mind would be completely shattered, and I would die instantly on the spot. "Amelia, absolutely not!" Sterling roared, desperately grabbing my small waist. "I will never let you risk your life to satisfy those arrogant politicians. I am not a weak liability you need to hide, Sterling," I told him fiercely. "I am your queen, and I will fight my own battles directly alongside you." I closed my eyes and forcefully projected my consciousness completely out of the fortress. Victor sneered cruelly and instantly unleashed a massive, terrifying wave of pure psychic darkness. The invisible magical attack hit me like a massive, crushing mountain of solid ice. It aggressively tried to strip away my new memories, my courage, and my newfound love. It forcefully dug into the deep, dark trauma of my terribly abusive childhood. But my past pain was no longer a weakness. It was my strongest, hardest armor. I pushed back against his dark magic with the pure, brilliant light of my silver aura. The blood bond in my palm burned hot, feeding me Sterling's endless, wild strength. I opened my eyes, and they glowed brighter than the massive winter moon above us. "Get out of my mind," I commanded the Royal Inquisitor with a voice that literally shook the earth. A massive physical shockwave of silver energy exploded outward from the high balcony. It hit Victor directly in his heavily armored chest, throwing him violently off his black horse. The Golden Royal Guards gasped in total shock as their invincible leader crashed heavily into the snow. Victor coughed heavily, thick black blood deeply staining his pale lips. He looked up at me, finally recognizing the true, undeniable power of the ancient North. "The sacred trial is complete," I announced coldly, looking down at the defeated Supreme Authority. "Return to your cowardly council and tell them the North finally has a true, unyielding queen." The Golden Army retreated silently into the freezing winter night. They carried their broken Inquisitor back to the frightened High Council. The terrifying threat of a massive continental war evaporated instantly. I stood completely still on the cold stone balcony. The harsh wind whipped my dark hair around my face. My brilliant silver aura slowly faded back into my warm blood. The heavy weight of survival finally lifted from my shoulders. I was no longer running. I was no longer hiding from my cruel mother. I was no longer a piece of property waiting to be sold. A pair of strong arms wrapped securely around my waist. Sterling pulled my back firmly against his solid chest. His heart beat with a steady rhythm against my spine. "It is finally over," he whispered quietly into my hair. "They will never question your authority again." I leaned back into his embrace and closed my tired eyes. The massive crowd in the courtyard below erupted into a deafening cheer. They were celebrating their undeniable victory and their new queen. Bonfires roared back to life across the snow-covered valley. Music and laughter echoed happily against the ancient stone walls. I turned around to face my powerful husband. His golden eyes were entirely focused on me. There was no hidden danger or dark poison in his gaze. There was only pure, unconditional devotion. He reached up and gently touched the silver crown on my head. "You saved my life in that dark alley," he murmured softly. "And you gave me a reason to live," I replied honestly. I thought about the desperate girl I was just a few days ago. I had offered a dying beggar a single gold coin. I wanted to ruin my mother's greedy plans and escape hell. I never expected to find a king hidden in the mud. I never expected to find a home in a stranger's arms. The ancient blood bond pulsed warmly between our connected hands. It was a permanent promise written in magic and blood. Sterling leaned down and captured my lips in a consuming kiss. The freezing winter air dissolved entirely around us. I kissed him back with every piece of my healed soul. The northern winds would always be harsh. The mountains would always be covered in deep snow. But I finally had a fire that would never go out. I finally had a family that would never betray me. We watched the stars appear slowly in the dark sky. The constellations looked different from the ones I knew as a child. They were wilder and brighter. They belonged to a world that was entirely mine. Beatrice was resting safely in a warm bed downstairs. My mother was gone forever. Lord Marcus was permanently broken. I had destroyed my old life completely. From the ashes, I built an empire. Sterling squeezed my hand tightly. I smiled up at the man who reportedly owned half of Scotland. Actually, he owned the entire north. And I owned him. I looked out over my massive, wild kingdom. I was Amelia, the High Lunar of the North. And my reign had just begun.